Ya estamos de vuelta en Negocios Televisión, pendientes de la última hora también, como siempre, con el mejor análisis, midiendo el impacto de esta decisión de Donald Trump, esta pausa de un mes en los aranceles con México, las amenazas a la Unión Europea. The Telegraph reportaba hasta un 10% de aranceles a los bienes importados. ¿Qué pasará con Canadá? ¿Qué pasará con China? Vamos a analizar estas cuestiones de la mano de Andrew Hale, Senior Policy Analyst in Trade Policy in the Heritage Foundation. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for coming in for Negocios TV. It's a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you so much for having me.
Andrew, I would like to ask you about Donald Trump. He has decided to suspend the tariffs with Mexico. Is this good news for the market?
Well, it's been a very positive development because, President Trump declared a national emergency under IEEPA, the International Emergency Economic Powers Act, at the border over the fentanyl crisis. And the very positive and mature response of President Claudia Sheinbaum of Mexico has been that she, of course, had a telephone conversation, a very cordial conversation with President Trump earlier today. And the result is that she is going to send 10,000 National Guard troops of Mexico to the U.S.-Mexico border to assist with the fentanyl crisis and, of course, the migration crisis. So, again, this was actually, and you might remember, in President Trump's first term, he threatened a 5% against Mexico under IEEPA, and that was never implemented because Mexico came to the negotiating table and provided extra border security. So this is an example of a very positive response to using the threat of tariffs as an instrument of statecraft, economic coercion, or even sanction to address a matter that goes well beyond trade policy or economic policy in the realm of security policy and foreign policy. Sadly, and I'll finish with this, Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada has responded not in like kind. He's responded with retaliatory tariffs. He's threatened retaliatory tariffs, and he's all he had to do was show the maturity and cool head that President Sheinbaum has shown in actually beefing up border security in Canada. He initially promised 1.3 billion extra funding in border security, but only over 4 to 5, 6 years, which is a drop in the bucket, and more needs to be done. He needs to take the example of the really positive solutions in Canada that have been promoted by the Premier of Alberta, Danielle Smith, who of course has committed provincial border guards along the Alberta-US border, as well as 24-hour drone surveillance. And she's proposed at the federal level that there be a Canadian retired general appointed to be a border czar to work in concert with the US border czar, Tom Homan. So again, those are some solutions that Canada could do to alleviate this and to prevent the implementation of these tariffs. But sadly, Trudeau has basically threatened in response a trade war which could easily escalate out of control and cause economic damage to both countries, which none of us really want.
Andrew, and where is the Trump's ultimate goal? Why is he using these threats? What wants he to win?
Well, under IEEPA, you have to declare an emergency, and of course, the fentanyl crisis is an emergency. It's an example of an emergency you can declare under IEEPA. And of course, I have a colleague right here in my building whose daughter died of a fentanyl overdose. So it is something. Many Americans have died. It's a crisis. We've had a crisis of illegal migration, an illegal invasion at our border, and this needs to stop. We need our allies to work with us, particularly those allies where China is producing all this fentanyl, and it's coming into the United States through Canada and Mexico. So it's appropriate that's addressed with our allies. Whether or not this will be challenged in the courts, that's another matter. So again, he can declare the emergency under IEEPA, but never before have tariffs been weaponized under IEEPA. In fact, the word tariff doesn't appear in that legislation. And when Congress gave in 1977 this power to the president, they never intended it to be used as a method to implement tariffs. So again, that really will be up to a federal judge to decide in the courts. Obviously, various interests are probably scrambling around to employ lawyers to challenge this in the federal courts, because some people wouldn't want to set a precedence whereby the president could use this to implement tariffs. In the past, in his first term, he implemented 301, 201, and 232 tariffs. But those tariffs are meant to implement tariffs for specific reasons against specific products and services where there is for example, under 301 tariff, an unfair practice. And he did that, for example, with regards to steel and aluminum against China as well as against the European Union. But of course, those tariffs were suspended, and they're still suspended. They're still in place, but they're suspended. And every so often, the European Union diplomats and the Americans get together and they discuss them. And then, of course, they kick the tin down the road and they're suspended again. They've never ever been formally lifted, and that's because I just think it's been politically difficult for both President Biden and President Trump to do so, given that they were both competing for the sort of Rust Belt worker base in certain U.S. states. But again, he discovered in his first term he had the 301, 201, and 232 tariff authority that cannot be checked from Congress. But to implement those, you have to go through a process that takes about 8 to 9 months. You have to build a legal case for them, and you're only doing it for specific targeted products and services. You can't really do it for an across-the-board tariff, which is what he's trying to do under IEEPA. And it remains to be seen whether or not a judge will agree that that is something that he can do. You may recall in his first term, as I said, he threatened this for 5% against Mexico in his first term under IEEPA, and Mexico immediately came to the table and offered more border security. And the issue did not come up again for the remainder of his administration. So again, I would just hope that Canada would follow the lead of Mexico and just beef up border security, which is what President Trump wants.
Andrew, and what about Canada? Trump has announced some talks with Justin Trudeau. He is going to talk about 9 p.m. here in Spain. Can we see another pause in these threats, in these tariffs?
I can't understand what you're saying. Could you repeat that question?
Yeah, I was talking about Canada. Trump has announced some talks with Justin Trudeau, with the PM of Canada. Can we expect another pause? Do you think he is going to pause the tariffs for Canada?
That ball really is in Canada's court, and it's up to Canada if they want to, engage in a trade war with President Trump, which I think he's perfectly willing to do, or are they going to follow the lead of Mexico and actually just commit more to border security? And the solutions have already been articulated by Premier Daniel Smith of Alberta. But I think the problem here is that Justin Trudeau has shown that, he has resigned. He's a caretaker prime minister. He's, I think he's willing to sort of, he has nothing to lose at this point. I fear that he might be willing to burn the village to the ground in order to save it, so to speak, and be rather rash. So I would hope that he would just do what President Trump wants, because this is not the whole argument they're making under IEEPA is of course, the fentanyl crisis at the border. So if he just addresses that, as opposed to engaging in a trade war, that'd be better for all concerned. But there's a greater problem there. Under Prime Minister Trudeau, there's been a huge infiltration in the entire, Canadian state and infrastructure there in Canada of the People's Republic of China. He's been very close to the government of the People's Republic of China. I fear that he's perfectly happy to, have increased trade with them, and he hasn't really raised the concerns about the human rights issues in China with regards to the Uyghur forced labor, any of that, which of course, he's been heavily exposed to China, and a lot of liberal politicians in the Canadian Parliament have been purchased by the People's Republic of China. So there's a real problem there in Canada, and it's a threat to the United States, given the level of encroachment of China and influence that they have over the current Canadian Liberal government.
The last question, Andrew. The Telegraph is reporting that Donald Trump is waiving some tariffs, 10% of tariffs for the European Union. What do you think about Europe? Could we see some tariffs in the next weeks?
It really depends if he goes back to what he did in his first term with regards to 301 tariffs on specific products, or if he's going to try to weaponize IEEPA again. And the question, of course, there is, you have to declare an emergency. Now, there is an emergency that we have here in the United States at the border with regards to the fentanyl crisis, with the Canadian-U.S. border and the Mexican-U.S. border. What's the emergency he could declare under IEEPA? I just don't know. I can't see So I can't really imagine one right now where there's an emergency that we have with the European Union that would justify. I think he's on legally safe ground because there is an emergency. Fentanyl is a huge crisis, and I think that is a justification for IEEPA in this circumstance. It remains to be seen whether or not the tool that he wants to use a judge will allow, which of course is the tariff. But with regards to the European Union, I'm just uncertain as to what emergency he would declare to use IEEPA in that context. And I think it's more likely that he will weaponize the 301 tariffs again, like he did in his first term, with regards to the 301 tariffs over steel and aluminium, which of course were suspended, and they're still in place, but they are suspended. So he could actually lift the suspension of the 301 tariffs with regards to steel and aluminium. But that's a different legal instrument of which he has control over, but it's a different context that they're more targeted. So it remains to be seen. I don't have a crystal ball.
Bueno, pues pendientes de estas amenazas de Donald Trump. Andrew, thanks for coming for Northwest TV's Expressor. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure being here. Goodbye.
Goodbye.